Freemasonry wants you to look at stonecutters. The internet wants you to look at shadows. One side points to cathedrals, tools, charity, and brotherhood. The other side points to hidden rooms, secret oaths, strange symbols, and men in power meeting behind closed doors. But the real origin of Freemasonry is not simple enough for either story. It did not begin as a world government, it did not begin as one secret council, and it did not begin with a single master plan written in a locked book. It began with stone, with builders, and with men who knew how to measure weight, cut lines, raise walls, shape arches, and build structures that would outlive kings. Somewhere between the medieval building site and the 18th century tavern, something changed. A craft became a fraternity. A trade became a network. Tools that once measured stone became symbols used to measure men. That transformation is the real mystery, because Freemasonry did not become powerful simply by keeping secrets. Many groups kept secrets. Guilds had secrets. Merchants had secrets. Royal courts had secrets. Churches had secrets. Freemasonry became different because it took the language of work, discipline, measurement, loyalty, and moral improvement, then carried it into private rooms where men from different classes, professions, and institutions could meet as brothers. That is where the origin story becomes dangerous. Not because every lodge was controlling history, but because a private room that connects builders, merchants, soldiers, lawyers, clergy, officials, and aristocrats is never just a room, it is a network. The older roots go back to operative masonry, the world of actual stonemasons. In medieval Europe, skilled masons were not ordinary laborers. They built castles, abbeys, cathedrals, bridges, halls, and churches. Their work demanded geometry, discipline, travel, and trust. A badly cut stone could weaken a wall. A wrong measurement could destroy months of labor. A weak arch could kill men underneath it. So the craft needed rules. It needed training. It needed recognition. A mason had to know who was skilled and who was not. He had to know who could be trusted with the work. He had to know which apprentice had been properly taught, which master had authority, and which man was pretending to be more than he was. This is where old charges, regulations, and craft traditions entered the story. Medieval Masonic manuscripts, such as the Regius or Halliwell manuscript, preserve early rules, moral duties, and legendary histories attached to the craft of masonry. They linked masonry to geometry, discipline, religion, duty, and the proper behavior of craftsmen. But these documents were not modern Freemasonry yet. They were something earlier. They belonged to a world where stone was real, labor was physical, and secrecy could be practical. If your skill gave you status, mobility, and wages, then your signs of recognition mattered. If you traveled from one building site to another, being recognized as a genuine craftsman mattered. If your trade depended on knowledge, then not every detail was meant for outsiders. But history rarely moves in a straight line. Over time, the building trade changed. The old world of cathedral building was not the same forever. Guild systems shifted, cities changed, patronage changed, religion changed, politics changed. As that world shifted, the lodge began to attract men who were not necessarily working stonemasons. They were accepted, they were gentlemen, they were educated men, they were interested in the symbolism, the fellowship, the privacy, and the moral language of the craft, even if they never spent their lives cutting stone. This is one of the most important shifts in the entire story. The movement from operative masonry to speculative masonry. Operative masonry built with stone, speculative masonry built with symbols. The square was no longer only a tool for checking angles. It became a moral idea. The compass was no longer only a tool for drawing limits. It became a symbol of self-control. The building site became an image of the human soul. The temple became a metaphor. The mason became a man who was supposedly shaping himself. That sounds harmless, but it also created a private language, a system where ordinary tools could mean something else, where a handshake was not just a handshake, where a meeting was not just a meeting, and where a man could enter a room as a stranger and be recognized by signs that outsiders could not read. By the 17th century, this world was no longer only about working masons. One of the most famous early examples is Elias Ashmole, an English antiquarian and scholar, who recorded being made a Freemason in Warrington in 1646. That entry matters because it shows that men outside the building trade were entering Masonic circles before the famous London Grand Lodge of 1717. So, 1717 was not the birth of every Masonic idea. It was the moment the scattered world began to organize itself into something more visible. On June 24, 1717, 4 lodges met at the Goose and Gridiron Tavern near St. Paul's Cathedral in London. They formed what became the Grand Lodge of London and Westminster. The setting matters. It was not a castle, not a cathedral, and not a royal palace. It was a tavern, a public house, a place where men could gather, eat, drink, talk, vote, plan, and create structure, away from the official institutions of church and state. That image is important, because modern Freemasonry was not born only from ancient legend. It was born in the social world of early modern cities. London was expanding. Coffeehouses and taverns were becoming places where ideas moved. Newspapers, pamphlets, clubs, societies, scientific circles, political arguments, and private associations were reshaping public life. Men were learning that power did not only sit on thrones, it also moved through networks. Freemasonry arrived at exactly the right moment. The lodge offered ritual, the tavern offered space, and the Grand Lodge offered organization. Together, they created something that could spread. The early Grand Lodge did not immediately control the world. It did not begin as a giant machine. The first years were small, incomplete, and not fully documented, but the model was powerful. Separate lodges could now be linked, rules could be written, authority could be claimed. New lodges could receive warrants, a private identity could become portable, a man could belong to one room, but also to something larger than that room. Then came one of the most important documents in Masonic history, the Constitutions of the Freemasons, published in 1723 and associated with James Anderson. This book mattered because it did more than write rules. It gave Freemasonry a story. Stories create legitimacy. The constitutions connected the craft to ancient builders, biblical figures, geometry, morality, and a long imagined tradition. Some of that history was legendary, some of it was symbolic. Some of it was far more useful as identity than as evidence. But that was the point. A group that wanted to grow needed more than meetings. It needed origin. It needed memory. It needed a reason to believe that a newly organized fraternity was not new at all, but part of something older, deeper, and more respectable. This is one of the hidden engines of Freemasonry's rise. It made the modern look ancient. It made the private look moral. It made the network look like tradition. Then elite men began to matter. As Freemasonry expanded, its public face became more respectable. Noblemen joined, professionals joined, scientists, clergymen, merchants, officers, lawyers, printers, and civic leaders entered the orbit of lodges. The Duke of Montagu became Grand Master in 1721, giving the young Grand Lodge aristocratic prestige. Men such as John Theophilus de Séguliers, a clergyman and scientist connected to the intellectual world of the period, helped give the organization a more polished and respectable image. That mattered, because networks rise faster when they can borrow status. A private club of unknown men is one thing. A private fraternity containing aristocrats, scientists, merchants, officers, and officials is something else. Now the lodge was not just a place of ritual, it was a place where men who might never have met through family could meet through membership. A merchant could stand beside a military officer, a clergyman could stand beside a lawyer, an aristocrat could sit in the same room as a professional man. The lodge claimed to create equality among brothers, but equality inside a private room can also create a second kind of power, access. The kind of access that leaves few public records. The kind that does not need written orders. The kind that happens through introductions, trust, favors, recognition, and shared identity. This is why the origin of Freemasonry cannot be treated as just a simple story about stonecutters becoming gentlemen. The shift from building site to tavern changed everything. A medieval mason needed secrecy to protect his craft. An 18th century fraternity used secrecy to protect its room. And a protected room can become a powerful thing, not because every man inside is plotting, but because everyone outside is excluded. That exclusion creates mystery. Mystery creates suspicion. Suspicion creates the shadow that still surrounds Freemasonry today. By the 18th century, Freemasonry had become a strange mixture of old and new. It borrowed from medieval craft language, but it grew inside modern urban society. It used moral symbols, but built private networks. It claimed ancient roots, but organized itself through new constitutions and grand lodges. It spoke of brotherhood, but required initiation. It presented itself as respectable, but kept parts of itself closed. That contradiction is exactly why people could never stop asking questions. If Freemasonry was only moral improvement, why the secrecy? If it was only charity, why the signs? If it was only tradition, why did so many ambitious men join? If it was only a social club, why did governments, churches, newspapers, and critics repeatedly worry about what happened behind the lodge door? The answer is not one simple conspiracy. The answer is a structure. Freemasonry became successful because it solved a problem for its age. It gave men a private space in a changing world. It gave them ritual when old certainties were breaking. It gave them hierarchy without monarchy. It gave them brotherhood across distance. It gave them symbols that could travel. It gave them a language of trust. And once that system existed, it could move from London to provincial towns, from Britain to Europe, from Europe to the colonies, from local lodges to imperial cities, from taverns to temples, from craft tradition to elite network. That is the real origin. Not one dramatic night where a secret empire was born, not one hidden document that explains everything, but a slow transformation, stone into symbol, worker into brother, lodge into network, network into influence. And the most unsettling part is that this origin story does not make Freemasonry less mysterious. It makes it more understandable. Because the true power of a secret society is not always that it hides one terrible secret. Sometimes the power is that it creates a room where relationships can form beyond public view, a room with rules, a room with symbols, a room with obligations, and a room that can reproduce itself in another city, another country, another empire. That is why Freemasonry survived. Not because every story about it is true, but because the structure was real. The builders gave it tools, the taverns gave it rooms, the elites gave it status, the documents gave it history, and secrecy gave it the one thing every private network needs, a boundary, a line between those who know and those who do not. So when people ask where Freemasonry really began, the answer depends on what they are looking for. If they are looking for its symbols, they must go back to builders. If they are looking for its legends, they must go back to old manuscripts. If they are looking for its modern power, they must go back to London's taverns. And if they are looking for the reason it became so difficult to map, they must look at the moment when a craft stopped being only a craft and became a private system of recognition. Because after that, Freemasonry was no longer just about building walls. It was about deciding who could pass through them. Once that door existed, another question became impossible to avoid. If Freemasonry spread through local lodges, grand lodges, elite circles, and private signs, then who actually controlled it? Was there ever one center, one command, one hidden authority? Or was its real strength something much harder to expose? Not a single throne at the top, but thousands of closed rooms, all using the same symbols, all protecting their own doors.